welcome to the third conversation on the book Transforming Language and Literacy Education, New Materialism, Posthumanism, and Ontoethics. My name is Magali Forte, and I have the great pleasure to meet with Dagenais, Brendan Sherman, and Annela Teemant. In the pandemic world that we live in, books and written stories have become a powerful way to not feel so alone for many. Technology has also allowed us, when we have access to it, obviously, to connect with people face to face, but in a virtual way. And so Kéline, Suzanne, Diane, and I, the co-editors of the book, decided to start this series of conversations with the wonderful contributors that added their voices and their stories to our book, because we feel that the recorded conversations people will have access to, such as this one, will be hopefully great companions to the chapters that they have written. So today we're participating in this conversation from different places in the world. Diane and I are in Vancouver, BC, in Canada, and Brendan and Annela are joining us from Indianapolis, in Indiana, in the United States. And before we get started and do proper introductions of everyone, we'll do a land acknowledgement, two land acknowledgements actually, as it is customary and important to do. And we want to really stress that these land acknowledgements are part of our commitment to supporting linguistic and cultural diversity and working for more socially just educational approaches in our research, in our teaching, and in our lives as settlers. So for Diane and myself at Simon Fraser University, we want to acknowledge that we live, learn, and teach on the unceded, ancestral, and occupied traditional lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Coquitlam, and Katzie nations of the Coast Salish peoples. And Annela, if it's okay, I'll cue you.
Sure. IUPUI was founded in 1969, and at that time we took land from a very active and vibrant African-American community. But the land prior to that was the historic homelands of the Miami people, the Potawatomi people, the Shawnee people, and many other tribes that were forced through these lands in Indiana. We, the present stewards of the land, they surrendered, try to honor them as we live, work, and study here at IUPUI.
Thank you.
And I would like to introduce the conversation series. So hello, everyone, welcome. And our book called Transforming Language and Literacy Education, New Materialism, Posthumanism, and Ontoethics was published in June 2020. And it would not have appeared without the thought-provoking contributions of several respected researchers and teacher educators, such as Brendan Sherman and Annela Teemant, who are both joining us here today. And so thank you, Annela and Brendan, for agreeing to chat with us about your chapter entitled A Rhizomatic Case Analysis of Instructional Coaching as Becoming, which you co-authored with Marie Haneda, who is Associate Professor of World Languages Education and Applied Linguistics at Pennsylvania State University. So before we begin our conversation, I'd like to introduce my co-host today and co-editor of the book and invaluable collaborator on a number of projects, Magali Forte. So Magali is a doctoral student and research assistant in the Faculty of Education at Simon Fraser University, as well as a French immersion teacher in Vancouver, British Columbia, where we are. In her research, she adopts a socio-material perspective, putting to work post-humanist, new materialist, and Deleuze-Guattarian theories in order to examine identity in a different way in multilingual education settings. Doing so, she acknowledges and continues to learn about the rich Indigenous perspectives that are informing her work. And I just want to add that she has just received funding from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada to support her research, and we are thrilled about this news.
Thank you. Merci, Diane. And it's my pleasure to introduce Diane Dagenais, who is a professor in the Faculty of Education at Simon Fraser University, where she teaches in French and English language education. Informed by new materialism and posthumanism, her recent research in applied linguistics documents encounters of multilingual learners, digital tools, and literacy practices in and out of school. I'll also introduce our contributors who are joining us today. So Brendan Sherman is the research project manager for the US Department of Education grant-funded initiative Partnering for Radical School Improvement. His research interests include critical and sociocultural pedagogies, nonlinear theoretical approaches to educational research, and dialogic interaction. His current research focuses on pedagogical coaching, professional learning, and equitable family community school partnerships. And Annela Teemant is professor of language education at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis in the United States. Her scholarship focuses on critical sociocultural theory and pedagogy in teacher preparation. She has been awarded 5 US Department of Education grants that focus on the preparation of general education teachers for multilingual learners using pedagogical coaching and teacher certification. She connects teacher learning to student learning outcomes using mixed methods approaches. And currently, she's researching the use of school-based leadership teams in leading radical change around equity, pedagogy, and family engagement. So thanks again for joining us today, both of you. We have a first question for you that we've asked our other contributors as well, and that's quite general, and I'll let you choose who wants to go first answering. But we were just wondering if you could tell us a little bit how you both started getting interested in post-humanist, new materialist, and or Deleuze-Guattarian perspectives, some of them that are quite central in the beautiful chapter that you wrote for a book.
Would you like to begin?
I guess I can. I will admit I'm probably, out of all of the authors on your chapters, the newest to this theoretical thread and thinking. I encountered it in 2017, so you can see I'm a relative newbie in this endeavor. But I had the great pleasure of talking to Dr. Katie Strom at an AERA conference here in the United States, where we were gathered under another federal grant by Dr. Karaviska to discuss multilingual education, especially among general education teachers. And in that conversation, when Katie told me, and she had presented, and then I said, we've got to talk. And as we talked, I realized just how much richness there was in this theoretical perspective and how much it represented the reality of what I had experienced as a researcher myself. Obviously, I've come from a quasi-experimental design approach. I have always gathered qualitative data and then done mixed methods, but never had this theoretical grounding behind the work that I do. And so I embraced it. I find it the most forward-thinking representation of what I experience as in pragmatic ways of implementing and working with teachers. And that's what I do. Most of my career is spent in classrooms and with schools and districts in leading change for multilingual learners. So that's how I'm new to it and have found it very helpful.
Thank you.
As for myself, 1,000 Plateaus was my entry into this world of theory.
Thanks.
It was presented to me as part of a course that I took when I was living in South Korea, and we read it as a class, pretty much front to back, without too much context or anything like that, and it was very heady as an experience. After that, when I went to Penn State as a grad student, the professors in the education college of education had a reading group that dealt with various theory kind of in this world. And that's where I was able to encounter Bennett and new materialism. I was able to encounter Barad and agential realism, really great stuff. And then I was introduced to Katie Strom's work by Dr. Teemant here. And that was very informative for me as well, because it really helped me. What I like about her work, and this is what I connect to, is that it's very, in a sense, practical. These ideas are very much put to work. They're used in schools. It's accessible. It's right there. And so I would definitely put myself in that kind of group of people who work with this theory. From Becoming Teacher, which was the first that I read of Dr. Strom's work, and all the time she's doing great work that continues to inspire. So I would say that that's been my journey.
I have a question. What kind of a course was it that you took when you read 1,000 Plateaus?
Oh, yes. That was an interesting course. It was, I don't even remember what it was called. Every week we were given a book and we read it. One week it was the Prison Diaries, I believe, Gramsci. Another week it was 1,000 Plateaus. Another week it was Freire. It just really eclectic mix of just some of the predominant theories that are out. Maybe predominant's not the right word, but more like frontier. And I think it's safe to say that Freire can still be considered frontier.
Yeah,
Implementation for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I love that you both went to how practical these theories are, because that's my my feeling around it, and I know it's Diane's too. And we often in our research and in our teaching practices, in our research team, we often comment on that, on how easy it is in a way, and difficult at the same time, because it asks us to kind of like get outside of our set ways of doing research and teaching, but how natural it is to use these concepts, whether it's assemblage that you mobilize in your chapter, or rhizome that you also mobilize, or other ones from Deleuze and Guattari's work. And I had a question about this kind of like complementarity / tension with the fields that you also come from before you entered these more recent, newer bodies of theory. So namely, in the chapter, you talk about the critical sociocultural perspectives on education that your project was built on. And you offer early on in the chapter the idea that rhizomatic thinking might open new potentialities and a focus on processes of transformation. And I was just wondering if you could comment on, like when we're immersed a little bit in those fields of posthumanism and new materialism and Guattarian thinking, sometimes people talk about the commensurability or incommensurability of these theories with post-structuralism, for example, or sociocultural theories. I just wonder how productive it can be, in your opinion, to put together both of these lineages, of these theoretical lineages together in our research endeavors, and what it's produced for you.
Maybe I'll start, Brandon, with and then you expand, okay? But I think as a quantitative researcher, I think it's really important to say that once we have a data point, say in a study of instructional coaching, that we know we have made statistically significant changes in teachers, and then statistically significant growth in student learning. Once you have that output and that data point, you still don't know how it happened. And so, it's one thing to publish on those things. And that's why I have always looked to the qualitative. If anything, I've always regretted that I didn't simultaneously minor in qualitative methods. But it has resonated with me that it isn't enough to say what happened. You have to understand how you got there. And that automatically, if you have any sense, any ounce of humility in you, you turn to other methods, you turn to other ways and perspectives on looking at things. So I have always found the purest in binary options presented to us in the world of research, in the world of thinking, as unproductive and not getting us where we need to go.
Thank you.
So you may not have expected to hear us talk about statistical significance today. It's not something that comes up very much in this world of theory, but I think it's really important that we understand and are comfortable with different ways of knowing the world.
Right.
And of course, that's such a core idea with rhizomatic theory. And, forgive me, that's how I'll refer to it, because we're always kind of in attention of what do we call all of these and how do they fit under an umbrella. So I'll just go ahead and say I'm saying rhizomatic, and other people may say different things. And I hope you understand that we're talking about relational ontology sorts of theoretical, fields. But, it's often said that the value of these is it gives us a new way to look at the world. Absolutely true. It's what's wonderful about them. Things like looking for statistical significance are also ways of looking at the world. And we don't necessarily need to reject them, even if they are incommensurate with, these are different paradigms. They're absolutely different paradigms. The question is not whether they're different paradigms. The question is, can we make something productive across paradigms? And I personally believe that it's more interesting to try to work across paradigms, including quantitative research. This is not something that you see talked about very much with this theory. But I don't believe we necessarily need to abandon it or cast it away or discount it. There's a lot of very useful and interesting things we can find from what one might consider traditional forms of research, whether that be quantitative or qualitative. So, you can have discussions of commensurability and incommensurability, and that's well and good. One of my favorite articles along this line is Murris and Bozalek, and forgive me if I'm mispronouncing it, but Diffraction and the Responsible Reading of Texts, the relational ontologies of Barad and Deleuze. And there's writing about what these two writers are. And I think they approach that very well. And they make the argument that we can read them through each other, and if hold that they are incommensurable. You can produce something interesting by reading them through each other. So taking that stance, we can work with quantitative research. We can work with sociocultural pedagogy. We can even find a place where behaviorism can be productive, right? That's personally that's my personal stance, where that is concerned. Not everybody takes that stance, and that's okay. But that's certainly where I come from.
If I add one comment to it, from a multilingual stance, that we all know we belong to different discourse communities, right? And we expect our students to become flexible and adaptable and be able to function in different settings. And so in many ways, I think we would benefit more at this time, especially in researchers who are able to speak the language of multiple paradigms. Until, for example, in my world, obviously, quantitative research gets funded with much higher funding dollars in the United States than any qualitative project ever will. Until that changes, we can either be purist and never get funded, or you can use the quantitative people in your life to write those grants that are quasi-experimental on one hand, but qualitatively rich on the other. And that's what I've tried to do in my career, and why I work with qualitative researchers as much as I can, because I know it is being able to address the the discourse communities that exist in realities in schools rather than in theoretical places and textbooks, that it makes a difference that we become bidialectal or multi-dialectal in our ability to talk across research paradigms.
Yeah, we're definitely very pragmatic about that. It really is, what are you producing? Yeah. And I did pull a quote in preparation for talking to all of you today. This is from May's wonderful article about when is Deleuzian becoming? And in talking about Deleuze's, and forgive me, I'm going to say Deleuze because I'm American and I mispronounce it all the time. So my apologies. But I also say, you know, almost maybe correctly sometimes too. Deleuze's approach to philosophy, right, is quoting, it's a practice whose point is not that of getting the right take on things, but of making a contribution to our living, right? And you can swap out living for learning. The point being, we're trying to produce something here. We're trying to do something here. So in terms of a paradigm, I'm safe in saying radical becoming is a wonderful paradigm. We're not trying to pin things down necessarily. We're not trying to find that fact about what this is or what works 100% of the time anywhere in the world or the universe. I'm pretty comfortable in being in more of a relational ontology of radical becoming there. But that doesn't mean we can't look to, for example, quantitative research to produce something and to help us, you know, support learning and living in a kind of theoretical hybridity that if it doesn't, sometimes it doesn't necessarily bridge these paradigms, but at least we can find the places where it resonates and it can produce.
That's very interesting to hear you talk about what it produces. And you know, what was really fascinating in your chapter is you mobilized Deleuze-Guattarian ideas about territorialization. There's my French, of territorialization and molar and molecular lines to analyze shifts in the dynamics and focus of instructional coaching conversations, in which two educators in your chapter you called Sabrina and Sharon participated. Are these ideas still helpful to you in your current work? And if so, how?
Yeah, I'll start with that, and then Brandon, you can swing in with whatever I leave out. But I want to echo that Roland Tharp's work on, he has a book out on Delta theory that came out in 2012, and he talked that all change comes from psychosocial systems coming to intersubjectivity, right, in having shared values. And so that's where the importance of the work comes in our orientation, not just to how we do our research, but what we do in professional development with teachers and how we expect them to engage with students. So the professional development that we described in the chapter and that we work with really is trying to come to a place of equity, and maybe echoing Joyce King and Ellen Schwartz's work from out of African American studies of improving collective, you know, we're about collective humanity, improving the social conditions of the students that we work with. So the molar lines are what are institutionally placed in the lives of teachers to work with and around. But it is those micro-political, those other lines of how it gets enacted. And in our work, we use critical stance, which is a restatement. Basically, I quantified how we could measure, because I love Freire's work, and I had read a dean's article who said, well, really, there's no place in teacher education for Freire. And I thought, wow, we have tons of empirical qualitative work that says how important it is. So because I try to talk to the discourse communities I'm in, I created a rubric where I could measure it. And lo and behold, it is, I know it's, you know, anybody working with Freire doesn't need a quantitative measure of the importance and the statistical impact of it, but I've done that to show teachers and to show funders that this is what matters most. Out of all of our principles of learning, critical stance, and what's represented in this chapter of how that teacher goes from critiquing instead of just accepting those lines and leads her students and herself to a sense of liberation. So these continue to be very important elements in our work with teachers. And what we're finding that is when we work with teachers in coaching conversations and in our professional learning in these ways to help them name, reflect, and take action, we can trace that now to how they engage with their students and help their students name, reflect, and take action.
Yeah, a big part of critical stance is interrogating the status quo and turning that into some sort of action. And so we want to see students given a space to do that. And the thing that happens when that happens is that you never know what's going to happen. You can be very surprised because it's authentic, it's coming from them. And so that's one place where these ideas are helpful, because critical stance, when you give learners the go ahead, right, to start questioning what is and make changes, what they're going to do about it, not telling them what those changes are meant to be, suddenly this is ripe for deterritorialization, right? I mean, the whole idea is that they're meant to be changing the world in a particular, not in a particular way, but in the way that they see the need to change, right? And they become the ones to do that. And so that becomes a force for deterritorialization. And territorialization and re-territorialization is very present. These ideas help us understand what happens when you start, let's just say, empowering learners, because there are forces that will push back against that too, and try to bring the classroom back to the way it was. And so we want to understand what might happen there, right? And it's unpredictable. And this is a body of theory that's helpful for helping us grapple with the unpredictable and really embrace it.
And maybe the pandemic more than ever, and in the United States, the murder of George Floyd has reset what we should be breaking down those territories that have been set up, that define the curriculum, define how students are represented, that really reverse deficit thinking towards teachers and towards students. We've been in a long period of neoliberalism. And we find that these conversations and being aware of these rhizomatic concepts that come out of us to help teachers deconstruct the contexts in which they work and live.
And you may be hearing, when we're going back and forth, sometimes people that work with Deleuze and Guattari can be kind of apolitical, or the idea of power isn't really, and you can probably tell that's not us. Yeah. We deal with the political with power. And this goes back to Dr. Strom as well. And you can even say back to Bredati and other people too, that, the critical matters, power matters, politics matters, and these ideas can help us account for that. So we're definitely not apolitical Deleuze-Guattarian scholars, for sure.
So powerfully put, very interesting to argue that way, and to remind us how concepts of deterritorialization, territorialization, re-territorialization can be very useful in thinking about change and change and also addressing equity issues and power. So thank you so much.
I appreciate that too, because like you just said, Brendan, often, like one of the things that keeps coming back in conversations that I have with people that are hesitant or have questions about posthumanist or new materialist or Deleuze-Guattarian theories is the fear that, which is justified, I think, in a way, but the fear that maybe we're leaving the human aside, and that this is going to be problematic because we kind of put aside all this lineage of fighting, of trying to, you know, like really put forward these important critical theories, critical sociocultural theories that you also work with. And yeah, some people question whether that's an issue and that's a concern when we're putting to work those relational ontologies. And like you, I don't believe it is, but I just, yeah, really appreciate the way in which both of you are braiding these different lineages in your work.
Anything in everything in education is relational. So in any effort to pretend there aren't power dynamics at play is inauthentic representation of what happens in the world. And the more we in education try to stay in that non-political realm, we are denying reality.
Mm-hmm.
So we just try to jump feet first into that deep end.
Well, and I think you've highlighted a really important tension with this theory too, and what it means to decenter the human. And I think we should never be satisfied with our answer to that question, because it's really not so simple as saying, okay, so we don't talk about people anymore, or, you know, we're not researching people anymore. That's too pat. It's not that easy. We decenter the human, but we are humans, and our research is always going to be coming from humans and consumed by humans and built on and produce that. And when we say it produces something, oftentimes it produces something through people. So, you know, it is very important that we always grapple with what it means to decenter the human. I think Braidotti's work is wonderful in this sense, because, you know, we're decentering the Western white male historical human in that sense, and kind of making something new, right? And I think that's really important. You know, we're not pretending we're not here. We're not the ones doing this, but we're. I've heard somebody, and I wish I could say who it was, use the word kind of, I believe it was epistemological suspicion. We're suspicious of this idea that we have to be at the center of everything, and we're always going to question it, interrogate it, and hold it in tension. But we don't sweep the human under the rug and pretend that it's not there either. Instead, we fight with what that means. And of course, when we're talking about education and learning, you can't take the human away.
Absolutely.
Well, in thinking about new concepts and theories, what have you been thinking with since the book was published? Because it was published in 2020, and here we are in May 2021. What are you thinking with these days?
Well, we're continuing to pick up these threads of rhizomatics to inform our work. We most recently had a paper come out on critiquing or helping us to think in new ways about effective features of professional learning. You know, there's been some very strong work out of what those essential critical features that high quality professional development focuses on: content, collaborative work, etc. There are about 8 features that have been represented. And we took the case of instructional coaching as a way to question the binaries that emerge out of lists like that. And we use the concept of mapping and tracing. Tracing is what you get out of, you know, hierarchical, linear, sort of, did I get those backwards? No, I think I got it right. And then that you have to put them back on the map, right? Yes. The tracings are the abstractions, and the map is what happens in the school setting. So I'll let Brandon continue with that, but we see that emphasis on multiplicity and connection, and anti-representation interpretation is really important in forming our work going forward still.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so this was part of a special issue in professional development and education that I believe it's a double issue. There were so many great people
Wow.
doing work with this. I think that's coming out currently. A lot of the pieces are online.
It's out.
It's out, yeah. And
Good.
so there are a lot of really great perspectives there. We really wanted to look at this idea of can you, through research and years and years and years of different research and publication, identify the essential features, right, of professional development as being effective? Can you actually find something essential? Because under, you know, the Guattarian paradigm, no such thing as an essential feature, right? Mm-hmm. And so what happens then when we start thinking about it that way? Not to discount that research, it's still very useful. It's a great starting point. We can build off of it. It's very productive. But to say, okay, now that we have that, you know, these effective features, and we can look at lists of them, and different researchers have found different sets of effective features. We looked at one in particular because it was specifically related to coaching and how coaching is effective as professional learning. Can we then find a more complicated story when you start looking at the actual application of these features in a real situation? Because you know, if we take a Guattarian view, every situation is going to be unique in and of itself, right? You can't necessarily make a pattern to overcode it. You can't say, all right, we've got this thing now, and we're going to fit it on top of every single instance of professional learning. But instead, we wanted to look at it and say, okay, you can start with that. But again, to put the tracing back on the map, what does it mean to take these essential features and make them into something that works?
We can give an example in a minute, but I want to go back to what Brandon was saying, is that, you know, before reading this work, I would have had this sense and this feeling to say something like, teachers aren't implementing it exactly like we think, right? Like, we have this thing and they're not quite doing, you know, what I fully imagine. And, you know, what I came to, you know, now I can think of how they adapt, and hybridity is what's happening. And that's what should be happening, right? But in the United States in particular, I don't know if the situation is as dire in other places in the world, but we usually wreck every educational word, but the word fidelity now is like a new swear word, right? Because districts are asking teachers to teach a textbook with fidelity. So every second grade teacher is teaching the same exact lesson on the same day in some schools for multilingual achievement. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, I question this worldview that deprofessionalizes teachers, asks students to be, you know, robotic in their response to worksheets and drills, and, you know, whole class questioning, and whatever they say is ignored as long as it fills in the 10 minutes or the 3 minutes they have allotted to it. So this case of teacher professional learning really embracing the hybrid nature of what we theoretically think is the full impact of Freire's critical pedagogy, or the work we've been doing from a critical sociocultural perspective at implementing Vygotsky's principles. It's really important in our work not to be strategy-based, but to be principles-based, to help them understand the human dynamic of coming to shared visions, shared values, shared learning in community. And so that's where, when Brandon and we were looking at this data, I had this story. I knew what this teacher had done, but we were able to map Rhizomatics, helping us to understand, you know, the tracing and mapping concepts, to see hybrid implementation and how it goes out, like the rhizomes, instead of being linear, hierarchical in their lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it moves us away from talking about, are they doing this right? To what's happening here. Mm-hmm. And this is it?
Context matters, right? So
yeah,
that's where we keep thinking too, that all these, like the list of critical features, it's almost like, you know, there's the sense that you should just use these wherever you are and everything will work. And instead we say context matters, and we should interpret everything through context. And a lot of that context knowledge comes from using these alternative theoretical paradigms to look and understand what's happening.
Yeah, yeah. We're not the only ones saying context matters. It's a commonly accepted idea, but this theory really helps us figure out, well, how does it matter, and what's going on when it does. So a really good set of tools for exploring that.
My teacher mind and heart was listening closely as you were sharing that example, and that's one of the parts of your chapter also in the book that I love, is the combination of the fact that you chose in that coaching assemblage to focus on those two. And I'm going to go back to the text because I'm not very well read in the pedagogical principles that you've that are at the heart of the research project that you have there. But you have the IC, which is instructional conversation, and then the critical stance coupled together. And the combination of these, like I kept thinking about classroom assemblages that I'm very privileged to be a part of as a substitute teacher. I see so many different ones from one day to the other. And, you know, Annela, when you were talking about these teachers that now have to be, that have to like abide by the fidelity of like following these textbooks, I think about the classrooms in which I get, where as a substitute teacher, in a way, it makes it easier, but where I have a plan where it's just about worksheets and textbook, and this is what we do during the day, and that's the classroom assemblage that I become a part of. And you know, there's like room for doing like a little bit of one-on-one, a little bit of, you know, like more kind of like hierarchical teaching. And I'm not saying it's bad or it's good, it's just, it is what it is. But then there's classrooms in which I walk in and where there's like a rough shape of the day on the board, and it's about more like talk to the students. And I see it already in the configuration of the furniture in the classroom. It's pods, you know, like little groups. And there's like even like students going to work in the hallway, and they're just like so comfortable with that. And I really feel like I'm only one part of that heterogeneous assemblage. And I just kept thinking when I was reading your chapter about how the combination of these instructional conversations of really focusing on how does learning happen, how does teaching happen in those little groups with the critical stance, it just made me think that it was really the perfect kind of like assemblage to look at with those two lenses of critical sociocultural theory and also the relational ontologies, the post-humanist and new materialist stance, which tell us that matter is important, that the material world, you know, like it's not just the backdrop, the furniture matters, the configuration of the bodies in the space and in the time that we're in that classroom, that matters too. So yeah, when you were expanding on that other example from your more recent writing, I really appreciate from a practitioner as well perspective, the wealth of thinking and of questioning and of being curious that you bring to our field.
It makes us really wonder, right, what we're centering, I think, mostly now in districts and in service of high stakes test scores, right? We have decentered teachers, we have centered the textbook, and we teach to fidelity to the textbook when we really should be teaching with unpacking what it means to teach with fidelity students, when the students are centered and when you follow their lines of flight, so to speak, when you follow their interests. And when you describe the two classrooms, the worksheet versus the one set up for dialogue, you know that the students are much more engaged, which means they're using language, they're collaborating, they're connecting school knowledge to their real world lives. That's where we need to be. And we have, it will take a lot to deconstruct the damage that has been done under neoliberal policies for some 20 years now.
You know,
That's your generation to fix. I won't, I'll be retiring in 6 years or so, and I won't be able to fix it, but I hope to upset the apple cart.
Well, while you're upsetting the apple cart, I was wondering if there's anything that you've discovered lacking in new ontologies in any way, and what are their shortcomings in your opinion, if you think there are any?
Well, there are strengths to all sorts of different approaches, and that's part of the reason why we like to reserve the right to jump between different ones and build connections and find what's productive. Accessibility is going to be a big one, and that's one thing that we're really concerned with. It's not good enough if we're only able to talk to the people who have read 5 or 6 books on the subject and have philosophy degrees, and that's just not going to be good enough. So I hesitate with the words strength and weakness, but I think there's not enough work being done to really bring these ideas into classrooms, and not just use things like assemblage and rhizomatic ideas to study teaching, but to actually bring them to teachers. And when you talked about resonating from a practitioner point of view, that's what we're talking about. We want teachers to see these ideas, and maybe that means we have to figure out how to talk about them in a different way, because as you were saying, Dr. Teemant, it's discourse communities and learning how to work across them. So maybe we do need to be developing that language. But these ideas are powerful. We know they're powerful. They're really helpful in helping us think about things in different ways. And so why should we be keeping that power just to ourselves, those of us who have read 1,000 Plateaus and maybe several commentary on it? That's going to be, I think, something to be addressed. How can we make these ideas produce something for everyone?
I think I just add one thing. I know you have to go, but Critical Pedagogy with Freire, Peter McLaren and Joe Kinchelo's book in 2008 talked about the inaccessibility of the language and why have we not gotten further in schools with the work. And it is that purist pragmatist dilemma that I hope we can learn and take on earlier, the liberation of teachers first, and along with the liberation of students, not saying that the teachers are more important, but the teachers are the obstacle to the liberation of students to engage in schooling in ways that honor who they are, their multiple and hybrid identities, and allow them to develop agencies that would change the world and improve the world.
One of the things that I found in my teaching this semester, I had students who are all practicing teachers and doing a graduate degree, reflecting on their practice. And they had, as some of the assignments, some of the chapters from the book, which they found really accessible, and found that the ideas were powerful, spoke to them in a language that they could understand. And so that's, I think, hopefully this is a first step with work like yours and contributions of the other authors to the book too, to be able to speak to classroom teachers.
Well, if I can just build on that, one of the things that I found really helpful with mapping and tracing and the idea of that, and really the idea of non-representational research, because that's something I struggle with as well in terms of methodology and in terms of writing in a non-representative way, which is such a contradictory endeavor, right? And what I've come to think about that is it's not about capturing the ideas necessarily, but it's about what does your writing produce in assemblage with the reader. So when the reader picks up your writing, and again, to bring up 1,000 Plateaus, you might open up that book at any point and just read somewhere, and it just may produce something for you, even if you don't, in a logical sense, understand what's going on. You might start having ideas, right? And so I'm not saying I'm trying to write that way necessarily, but I am thinking about what it means to do academic research and publication in such a way that the articles go into a relationship with the reader and produce something. And accessibility is an important part of that. So when you say that your students have gotten something out of what they've been reading and that they found the ideas to be powerful, that's the goal. It's not to convince the reader, oh, well, this person certainly is well read and understands this very well, because I don't know that I do. I try to, but can I make something that makes something? That's really what it comes down to.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you both for your time. It was wonderful to talk with you, and thank you for the lines of flight that you've brought up too. I feel like we could have another hour of a conversation on non-representational approaches to research and teaching.
Well,
that's
thanks
a big
for
one.
inviting us. We appreciate being part of your effort.
Well, it was really nice to meet both of you this way too, and to listen to you talk to your chapter and the ideas that you've been working with. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for creating the space for us to converse about it. And I never get tired of talking about these things. I hope I haven't talked too much.
I'll remember that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a good one.